Dynasty owners, welcome to another weekly breakdown video. So today we're going to be jumping into the conference breakdowns. We've gone through all the teams, 32 teams in 32 weeks. Now we're going to do two articles, one of the AFC and one over the NFC. So let's jump into it. At the time of this writing and when you're watching this video, we're only 10 days away from the regular season starting. So very exciting times. We're getting close. As I say in my article, this is the final stretch. So let's jump into it. First, we're going to go through all the divisions and just give you one little tidbit, probably the most important thing that I had in each article, just as a reminder, and then also adjust some things because we've, had some breaking news, obviously, since I wrote some of these articles. So start with the AFC East, start with the Jets. So Jets article. So the whole AFC East division, I did blind contract breakdowns, which is one of my favorite things to write about. So in the Jets article, I talked about the difference between Corey Davis and Jameson Crowder. I compare both of them to each other. Essentially, long story short, what ended up happening is I prefer Davis over Crowder. I don't think that's really hard to see, especially with how Zach Wilson's been progressing and finding Davis as the number one target. Davis is going to be the wide receiver one for the Jets this season. At least that's what I predict. So I have him projected to finish the season as a wide receiver 3. So right in that wide receiver 36 to 45 range, somewhere in that area. I wouldn't let the $12.5 million salary dissuade you from drafting or trading for Corey Davis. That's actually not that unreasonable for a decent wide receiver. We know that some of the wide receivers these days go for, right around 18, 20, 22 million. So not terrible of a salary. Up next, a Bills article. I compared Zach Moss to Ronald Jones. Essentially, I like Moss a little bit more just for the fact that he has 2 extra years remaining on his contract. And then, he's a little bit younger. I believe they're the same age, 23, but a few months younger. So not too much to make about that, but I prefer Moss at this point in their careers, especially in Dynasty owner. Patriots article. I talked about the differences between Damian Harris and Devlin Singletary, how I surprisingly prefer Damian Harris over Singletary. Kind of the same thing with Moss and Ronald Jones, where the contract I just like a little bit better. I wrote this Patriots article before Sony Michel was traded, so that obviously helps a little bit. I don't think it helps as much as people would think. They still have a few capable backs that'll take touches away from Harris, but as far as the pure runner goes for New England, I trust Harris. I'd love to have him as my third running back, my starting bench running back in Dynasty owner. It's a very reasonable place to have him. And finally, we have the Dolphins. The Dolphins was actually one of the tougher articles for me to at least do the contract comparison. So I compared Tua to Daniel Jones. And even at this point, I think I would take Tua, but I'm not exactly sure or confident that that's the, going to end up being the right pick. I picked Tua. He's a year younger. His salary is a little bit more expensive, but he has, obviously those extra years on his contract. So I think the overall upside is just a little bit more for Tua at this point in his career. Moving on to the AFC North. So the Steelers, that was a great article that I wrote. I talked about James Conner quite a bit. I had a personal, story about me and how I drafted Conner in almost every league I could in 2018. That was when the Le'Veon Bell situation was going on. Long story short for this one as well, I wrote about how Conner, he still hadn't signed with anybody. He was still technically on the Steelers team, but we kind of figured he wasn't going to be with them when the season started. And we were right. He goes to Arizona. He's going to be the RB2 in Arizona. Chase Edmonds is going to be the number 1 guy, I think, for at least the majority of the season. And so I wrote this about Conner. I'll give you a quote from the article that I wrote. When was this? This was back in either March or April. So I said, so what do we do with him? We wait. I currently own Conner in my beta league. I'm fine holding on to him until a new place of employment is discovered. He will still be on a lower-end running back contract, but Dynasty owners need to accept the fact that he will not return 2018 value ever again. And that's the main point. I think the majority of us have figured that out. He's never going to return that value with a cheap contract and just RB1, top-end RB1 upside. That's not going to happen. So he's going to be a decent piece for your roster. He'll be a good bench running back, a good extra running back to have for depth. But other than that, he's not going to be your RB1. He's not going to be RB2. He's going to be a solid bench running back. Unless Chase Edmonds gets hurt, I'm not projecting that. I don't even stat based on possible injuries. So we'll see what happens with that backfield as the season progresses. The Ravens, just want to touch on Gus Edwards. Not really much in the way of Edwards' production himself. So he signed a tender 1 year right at about $3.4 million. The majority of what I wanted to say about him and did say in the Ravens article was that he's just going to be a thorn in the side of J.K. Dobbins owners. He'll probably get a lot of those end zone touches. Dobbins will get his fair share too, but when you see, 4 or 5 touchdowns getting vultured away from Dobbins to Edwards throughout the season, it's going to be annoying when you own Dobbins. The Bengals, I wrote with the Bengals. I gave a broad overview of a lot of the free agents that they had. They actually had a lot of them. So I talked about players like A.J. Green, John Ross, P. Ryan, Brandon Allen. And Brandon Allen's the one that I kind of focused on mainly in that article. It's kind of a moot point. So a lot of what I talked about was that you might get a few spot starts out of him just because we didn't know when Joe Burrow was going to come back. There were rumors that he might miss 1, 2, 3 weeks. That's not looking likely. Looks like Burrow's going to be back. He's on track to play week 1 against the Vikings. So kind of everything that I said in that whole paragraph in that first original article, it's a moot point, like I said. So he's an insurance piece. Brandon Allen is to hold on to, but I wouldn't count on him making an impact at all this year. Rashad Higgins is who I talked about in the Browns article the most. Again, kind of a theme here. Another kind of a moot point because we got Odell Beckham Jr. coming back. We kind of knew that was going to happen, but he's on track to play week 1. And then we also have Jarvis Landry, who's going to be the wide receiver 2, kind of figuring out still how they're going to flip-flop, Odell Beckham and Landry between the wide receiver 1 and 2. But either way, Higgins is going to be the wide receiver 3. Still, obviously, a lot of talent. Need to hold on to him. Cheap salary, but not really going to be startable. He'd be a good bench wide receiver to own. So your AFC South, this is one of my favorite divisions to write about just because I put a little bit of a trade aspect in all these articles. The first one I talked about was the Colts. So I did a quick contract breakdown with Carson Wentz. His contract is 4 years, $32 million. The main point is that it's a terrible value for dynasty owners. I wouldn't want to roster him in any league. That's pretty much it. I mean, he's on a terrible salary. He's moving to a new team. He has a below average receiving core. I don't mean to be negative, but it's just one of those things where he's not going to return you any amount of value, even if he does have an average to slightly above average season. It's just not something that's going to help you win your league, especially chase for the ring. So, Titans article focus on Anthony Firkser. So this is what I wrote about him back in March. I wrote this all the way back in March before free agency opened. I said Firkser is 26 years old, be a restricted free agent. He'll make more money in 2021, but I don't expect it to be a lot. I'll put him right around $3 million per year. We now know that that's exactly what he got paid. And the trade advice was, he was available in the third dynasty owner leagues back in March. It's actually gone up quite a bit since then. I believe we're right at 98%, which makes sense. He's going to most likely be the starting tight end, the highest receiving tight end for the Titans. So, like I said, he did get that 1 year, $3 million contract. And that actually happened 8 days after I wrote this article. So pretty good timing for that. As for the Jaguars, there wasn't really much to talk about as far as contract breakdowns. What I mainly focused on was they had 6 notable free agents. They kind of just had a revolving door of players coming in and out this whole offseason. And of those 6 free agents that I talked about, only one ended up re-signing with the Jaguars. And you can go to my article and look at where all the other 5 players landed. But I talked about Keelan Cole, Chris Conley, Chris Thomas, D.D. Westbrook, Tyler Eifert, and Daragu Mawale. And he was the only one that ended up signing back with the Jaguars. So really not much to talk about with him. I mentioned him because he's worth rostering, I would say, just as a depth add. But he's going to be buried on the depth chart behind James Robinson and Carlos Hyde. Obviously no ETN for the rest of this season, but he'll still be the third running back on that team. Final team, AFC South, Houston Texans. The Texans actually, their article happened to coincide with the opening of free agency. So all that I touched on was Will Fuller at that time. And we already knew that Will Fuller was going to the Dolphins. So just talk about him just a little bit. We knew that he was going to the Dolphins, but we obviously hadn't known yet that the Dolphins were going to draft Jalen Waddle. So it's maybe a little bit of a hamper for him, makes the team overall better, so maybe more scoring opportunities. But regardless, Fuller's going to be sidelined for week 1 due to his PES suspension. That suspension spanned 2 seasons. He's currently owned in about 85% of dynasty owner leagues, so I would definitely hold on to him. I've actually seen him available in one of the leagues that I own, that I have. So it's interesting ad if you do see him on your free agent auction. And finally, we're going to talk about the AFC West. AFC West was another fun article theme that I did. So I included the top 10 of each position in these 4 articles. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. And appropriately, the Chargers article ended up being the quarterback one. And that makes sense because I have Justin Herbert as my number one quarterback. He barely beat out Kyler Murray for the top spot. That was mainly the salary. So Justin's salary is about $2.3 million less than Kyler. And he also has an extra year remaining on his contract. So a very valuable year, especially with a cheap contract like that. Chiefs. So the Chiefs article, I had fully expected to have Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a top 10 running back when I started to do this whole theme together. And it didn't work out that way. He actually ended up standing out as my running back 11. Well, as almost everybody knows by now, Cam Akers was injured, and he was my running back 5. So due to that, Najee Harris slides up. Every player below him slides up, and Clyde jumps into the top 10. So it ended up making sense. Very unfortunate for Cam Akers and everyone that rostered Cam Akers, but it is what it is. Edwards-Helaire slides into running back 10 for running back values coming into the 2021 season. And the Broncos and the Raiders, the last two teams I'll talk about, I combined them into one article, and those are my tight end top 10 rankings. So Darren Waller came in as my number one tight end just due to his cheapest salary. He's half the salary of Kelsey and Kittle, and he gives, let's say, right about 80% of production, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But when you have half that salary, that's an amazing value compared to the other two. That's why he comes in as my number one wide receiver. And I would put my money where my mouth is. If I was doing a startup draft tomorrow and I needed a tight end and I was up on the clock, I would take Waller first before the other two. No doubt about it. And to follow this up, the Broncos' primary pass-catching tight end, Noah Fant, he comes in as tight end 7. That's pretty much it. I also did, at the very end of the article, I did a tight end tier breakdown. I feel like there's a pretty clear tier break for the top 10 tight ends, and I can list them off real quick. So the top 3, I think most people know who they are. They're Waller, Kelsey, Kittle. Those are how I rank the top 3. And then the second tier, you have Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson. I think that's a pretty clear line as well, cutting that off. And then the next 4, rounding out the top 10, are Noah Fant, Irv Smith Jr., Mike Gesicki, and Dallas Goedert. So just kind of the way it works out. I would be happy to roster any of those in that final tier. They're obviously, I think they're talented enough to break into the top tier at some point over the next couple of years. They just haven't shown it yet. They're still, all younger tight ends. So very, very encouraging from what I'm seeing from those 4. Anyway, that's it. Next week, we're going to be doing the NFC recap. Pretty much the exact same format that I just did now. Looking forward to it, and I appreciate if everybody follows us on Twitter at Dynasty Owner. Follow me on Twitter at Dynasty Jerk, and then watch out for our YouTube videos that all of our guys do. We do a good job. We'll probably be having a little bit more content throughout the regular season too, just from a statistical standpoint, bringing you, who's scoring where on each week and who's leading, value wise. So I appreciate everybody listening.